Now let's understand how scaffolding templates work in MVC. So I'm going to add similar project to task list application. I'm going to create MVC4 application. Let's name it as task list demo with template or scaffolding. And let's pick up now empty, again ASPX engine, and click on OK. And just like the way we added earlier model first called as edge task, I'm going to add same model one more time. So I'm going to say right click, add one new class, and let's name this class as edge task. Now inside the edge task, I'm going to add a few properties. Let's add ID. Same way, let's add description. And same way, let's add is it done or not done. So boolean and is it done. Exactly same thing. Then we'll add a controller here. And with the controller, let's name this as edge task controller as a name. By default, we have this so-called index method. Like last time we did this, I'll try to change the name for this as display. And then inside app start root config, I'll make a small change to show me first edge task slash display. And then inside the display, as you know, I wanted to have a table constructed wherein we'll have, you can say, entire object or entire collection returned. So I'm going to copy paste some code from the previous application just to recreate the scenario. So I'll reload the previous project. I'll go to controllers, and from the previous project, I'm going to copy paste the content of display method. Let's copy this. Go to again, and this application is our startup project right now. And let's try specifying here the entire content. So same way, session of task equal to null. We require edge task, which will come from models namespace, and then everything else will remain same as it is. It's literally replica of a previous application. However, the change we need to see here is we need to see how UI can be created with the help of scaffolding template. So what does it mean? First, make sure that you compile your application. Make sure your model is compiled and or model is part of a compilation process right now. And the next thing that we'll do now, we'll go to views section. We'll create a folder inside views. Let's name the folder as edge task, just like we did earlier. And let's name this as display as it was earlier. But this time I'm not going to go and uncheck everything and click on add. I'll pick up ASPX, and we have an option here which is called as strongly typed view. And then in IntelliSense or in the list, you can find out whatever classes exist into your project right now. Filter config, root config are not our classes, but then edge task is our class. So let me pick up edge task, which is a model class right now. And then we have one more option which is called as what are you going to use this view for? So I want to use this view for listing all the edge tasks into it. So I'll pick up list. This is, you can say, scaffolding template as you can see from here. And let's add now and see suddenly what happens, guys. Add it. So in the edge task project, display.aspx get added. Automatically at the top, you'll find out I enumerable of edge task appears, which so far we were doing. And now here you'll find out there is automatically table trtd which comes up, which also specifies th names were hard coded. Now it conveys html.display name for, and this returns me only the value. So it is more like a literal. So whatever is the content of description, whatsoever is the content of is it done, that gets displayed over here. Important point to note, this is using HTML helper just like we tried to use some time back. Below, just like we used for each loop, the template also uses for each loop. And in every TD, remember we created text box for. Now here we have got something called as display for. Remember in the TD we entered all the data directly in a percent bracket. Here it uses HTML helper. And then there are links available specifically for editing purpose, for details, and for delete purpose also. So if you see edit is there. Now when you see this helper called as html.action link, what is it that it is going to go and do? It's going to go and display edit, just like in anchor tag. It's going to give a call to a method called as edit, and it's going to pass on a parameter called as id equal to items id, in the sense the current h tasks id property. So just like the way we created a href and we passed on slash home slash index and some parameter, exactly in the same manner a href or anchor will be created with the help of these tags. Now below, after display, above, after display, you will find out we have got again action link which specifies create new, and we'll give a call to the action method called as create. But which particular controller the create method will be into, or in which particular controller we will have, you can say, edit method, it will be by default htask controller, which is going to go and return the display view itself. So if I run this code now, see, I did not write any HTML markup, and then when I run the code, you will suddenly see all the code available in this format. Another surprise here, when we specify html.display for and display for is it done, considering this is it done is a boolean variable, you will find out checkbox automatically appears. And if you notice now, the string which gets formed after I hit edit button, can you have a look now? Look at the left bottom of the browser. It's htask/edit/1 slash edit slash 2 and slash edit slash 3 is what we are calling. If I click, obviously we end up in error because we do not have any method so far called as edit available. Now just like the way we generated scaffolding template for display, one can do the same for create as well. So let me do one thing. Let me create one create template specifically for the code. So let me add one view. Let's name this as create. But am I going to go and create all text boxes by myself? No. I'm going to pick up ASPX. I'm going to say I want strongly typed view to htask, and the purpose for which I want this view is creation purpose. So add now and observe what appears now. It's a singular htask model. We have got, instead of form tag author by us, now html.begin form becomes a method from HTML helper. There is a validation summary. If at all there is any error, we can capture and we can publish as a bulk on the UI itself. Then we have got label for, which means display the text for description, and editor for, which means display the text box for description right now. Now if editor for, in the sense if it's boolean, it will be checkbox. Editor for also takes care of if it's so-called, you can say number, it can be type equal to number and so on. And there is also one more thing called as validation message for. So if there is anything wrong with respect to description, we can very well accumulate or collect all the messages and we can show it in the UI beside the text box itself. But how do I collect the errors? How do I check the errors? Let's see first what happens here in create. So on create, we need to return a view, which is what we are doing right now. So let me go to controller again. We require a create method. So let me close this first. Let me also copy the code from previous application for create, as the code may remain same on a controller side. So let me copy create code quickly. And then whatsoever lies in create, both the methods, post and normal method, I'm going to simply copy paste entire code. So close it and copy paste it here. So that way we have got now a create view, which is going to simply return empty UI, which is what we have just constructed using scaffolding template. After submission, we will collect object of type new htask in create, and we will check here if session of task is not null, add the you can say new task, else create a new session and then add into session that value, and then we'll again redirect user to htask.display method itself. So after this much, let's try to run the program now. So we have display first, then I'm going to go and click on create, and I'm going to specify description only. So description will be, let's say, maybe ABC, and is it done? I would say true. Create now. We have got ABC and create new. However, it doesn't, I can say, display ID property because it considers the scaffolding template that ID is auto generated. How edit happens, we already have, we can say, mapped with edit slash 4, edit slash 3 this way. So still number is there in picture, but number is there specifically when we give a call to edit functionality or details or delete even. But normal display and create, it does not basically ask for ID also. Because if I carry a cursor on ABC now, you'll find out edit slash 0 appears. Even if I add one more here, suppose if I add one more, maybe let's say testing. And if I say is it done, false. If I say create, you'll find out for this it's 0 and for this edit as well the ID becomes 0. So it's just a, I can say, this template is just assuming that we have, you can say, values inserted into a database and DB assigns a default ID, or ID is auto incremented just like a sequence. Now, the next thing, important thing to understand, if I click on create new and if I don't enter anything and I stick create, you'll find that even blank gets inserted now over here. Now, that's what I don't want to allow. If there is blank text, I want to show error to the end user. One can very well write down JavaScript before submission happens, and one can very well go and validate the same thing on the client side. But instead of we doing it on the client, can we do it on the server itself? And how do I do it on the server? And how do I go and show the messages? So we have a very simple option. Go to your model first. And inside the model, we would like to do validation against these values for checking like whether it's a valid email ID, whether it's a blank, whether it's you can say correct or not. Which means whatever validation controls that you have seen or you have used in web forms, I need to use same controls over here. But unfortunately, those are the ASP.NET controls and we are in MVC. So how do I handle this? So if you have ever worked on Silverlight or maybe Prism, we have got something called as data annotation library, which may help us get this validation done. And to give you an example, under description, suppose if I don't want blank, just specify an attribute called as required. Now I don't get IntelliSense because I'm missing the namespace here. So let me import system.componentModel.data annotations, which helps us capturing the errors and giving error messages back to the client end also. This is server-side validation we are doing right now. And we have certain parameters, as you can notice. We have got parameters like something called as error message. So if it is empty, in that case, if this property is empty, then how do I go and what is the error message we want to display? And there is also resource and resource type, which means if you wish to go and collect the error message from the resource section, RASX files, specifically for localization purpose, you may do that. So I'll specify a very simple property now, error message equal to all optional parameters, and I'll specify description is must. Then same way, right now we are not adding any ID, it's by default taking it as 0 so that we can skip. But if at all error message is so and so, at the same time, if I want any other, you can say validation, you also have something called as a very famous one, which is called as a regular expression. And this will take a parameter called as pattern of the regular expression and error message as named parameter. So if you wish to do any validation against so-called email ID also, that also you can do. Now let's try to see what problem happens if at all error message or value is empty. Will it work now? Let me run the code again. Let me say create and let me not enter anything and create again. What again happens is I get blank over here. So because we haven't specified the condition, what if the value is blank, then what has to be done? Maybe whatever user has entered, maybe if user has entered anything wrong, in that case, along with that content or along with error message, we need to return back to the UI. So which means in HTask controller here, this should run only in one case, whenever we have valid data available with us. In the else case, if it's, you can say this if and else, this condition, it should only run whenever we guys have the valid value. If there is no valid value, then we may want to end up in error. So how do I check whether data carried from the client side to server side is valid or not? We have a very nice property given by MVC, and that property is filled up with the value before even the call comes into the create method also. How is that? Observe. So somewhere in sequence of MVC lifecycle, we get this property which is called as model state, and we get something called as is valid over here. And this property will tell us true or false, which means is the model object received from a client side, is it according to the expressions applied, is it satisfying the criteria? If yes, then continue. No, then don't continue. So we get all these values like true and false value based on the compliance using is valid property. So what is it that we want to do now? We want to check if model state is valid, then continue doing this. But in the else case, what we want to do, we want the data along with errors as it is, or data along with content as it is, to be returned back to the user. So what will happen if I say return a view along with the updated or a new edge task object itself? Have a look, guys. I receive a new task. If new task is not valid, in that case, that new task I need to hand over to the view. And then when we go to view engine, it's also going to go and grab the values which are basically error values as well. Let me show you what happens now. If I run the code again, I'll go to IE as a browser. I'll say create a new. But then whenever I click on a create button now, see what happens here. I'll put a breakpoint in else, and I'll also put a breakpoint in if. Click on create. Here we come, and if you see, the is valid value is right now false. So obviously we will jump to else part. We'll hand over the view, but this time along with the error messages. And now you can see description is must is the error message that we receive over here, which means you won't be able to go back to the display function, display view, unless until you enter something. So you enter now something over here. Let's say it's done, it's not done, and now I'll click on create button. Is model state valid now? Now it comes as true. Let's continue and get the UI now. And now we have something entered over here. Now this way one can do server-side validation very easily. Can we write down any custom validation in that case? Let me show you how is the definition of required looks like. Right click here and go to definition. So required attribute is actually a class which inherits from validation attribute class. And then when you have validation attribute class, it simply gives you a method to override. The base gives you a method to be overridden called as isValid, which provides you a value and returns you Boolean value. Mean to say, custom validation does not exist by default, but can we add one then? So let me try that. Unload this project, previous project. Let's continue with this project. And here, maybe in the model, maybe a folder itself, I may add it. But as I suggested earlier, if any other extra class exists, let's try to add it into a different folder, because let's not disturb the MVC hierarchy anywhere. Let's define this as helpers. Inside the helpers, I will add one extra class. Let's give a class name as, let's say, maybe H validation or H validator is what I'll call it as. And inside this H validator, I'm going to go and implement now from system dot component model dot data annotations. I'm going to implement or inherit from a class which is validation attribute class. And as we discussed earlier, I'm also going to go and override now the function which we talked about called as isValid. Look at the parameter which we get here. The parameter we get here is called as value. And now we just have to go and return now. I guess we have this one as wrong. So I just want is valid, which is taking single value called as value. And now here we need to return now true and false. So we will, just for the sake of validation, I'll check here if the value dot toString equals, let's say, suppose hardcoded 1 2 3 4. You may put an algorithm here to check whether it contains a integer or not. I'll return false. and then in else case I'll return true from here, which means if the value contains 1 2 3 4 or value has 1 2 3 4, I'll just, you can, as I said, you can always go and check for any algorithm here, or any kind of a check you can perform. So if it contains 1 2 3 4, I want to return false, else I want to return true. And this h validator that we have right now, I want to apply on my own description property. So just like there's a required attribute, I'll specify h validator attribute, and I'm going to resolve this and get the helper namespace now. And just like we did here earlier, I'm also going to go and specify now error message which comes from the base. I will specify description can't have numbers and surprise. So now let's run the code again. This time I want to run the code not using debug. I am going to run it using control F5. So let me say create new. If I say create, a reply comes back. Now we have a problem here. Object value does not exist because I did not enter any value. I should have checked here that whether value exists or not. So if I should check here, if it contains, then return false. If value is not equal to null and value contains 1 2 3 4, then only do. Otherwise, anyway, I'm going to return this return true is basically hard coded right now. So anyway, the other validation control will help us in getting the data. So if it's not equal to null, instead of that I should have checked string.empty, because default value will always come as empty in this case. Run the code now. Again, value is an object, so I should have converted this into string first. Sorry for that. Run this now. And then let's click on create new and let's click on create. So what happens now? We end up in an error here. Looks like value is null. Okay, so previous writing was correct. Shouldn't have checked for string.empty. If it's not equal to null and if it contains 1 2 3 4, then only continue, giving error. Click now, enter nothing, you click, but then we get an error from the else part, that is description is must. But if you enter 1 2 3 4 now and you click, now we get description cannot have numbers, which means our validation you can say code also gets executed. Now before even I come to model.isValid, so I'm going to put a breakpoint here, also going to put breakpoint at this line, and will put a breakpoint at my isValid function as well. I want you to check, since the object which is received, this object contains some wrong data, and because of which I may get isValid as a false value. So when exactly isValid value gets checked? Is it in the method or even before a call comes to a create method? So let me run this now. Click on create button and let's enter 1 2 3 4 as an invalid value. Let me click now on create. Have a look where the call goes. Click. See, the call did not come to the method directly called as create. The call went to isValid method, and what's the value inside it now? 1 2 3 4. So after checking this, now when you say continue, now it comes to a method called as create, which means just before your create method gets called, your code or your lifecycle or MVC has gone through some extra function. That function has set up the value for model state is valid equal to false, and based on which we will get the exception message and we will return back that message to the end user also. So server-side validations are very simple that way, because if it's a custom validation, you will just implement a validation attribute and write down a function against it. At any point of time, if at all you want a regular expression specific validation, you always have in data annotations something called as required. You also have something called as regular expression. These things anyway exist, and you can very well go and create your own validation based on your own needs. So that's very simple, and client-side validation is all dependent on the JavaScript itself. So I'm going to pause the session for a while.